The envoy ship arrived with a white banner, or what passed for one among the Vethari, a folded membrane of pale cartilage stretched between two poles, the color of surrender that their species had used for 11,000 years. Ambassador Sora Vethanal stood at the forward window and watched the human station grow in the viewport, her primary hearts beating in misaligned rhythm. Anxiety. She allowed herself to feel it. Masking emotion from the humans had proven pointless early on. They read it anyway, in ways the Vethari still could not fully catalog. Behind her, the diplomatic cortege murmured in the low subharmonic register that served as private speech among her people. They were afraid. She was afraid. The difference was that she had agreed to this, and they had merely been assigned to it, and the gap between those two states was something her culture had never found a satisfying word for. She had proposed it. The peace accord had taken 19 months to negotiate and 3 rounds of near collapse, 2 of which had been caused by translation failures, and 1 of which had been caused by a human junior delegate who had made an offhand remark about Vethari eating habits that was meant as a joke and landed as a declaration of contempt. The human senior delegation had spent 6 hours apologizing. The Vethari had spent those 6 hours recalibrating their entire model of human social communication, because no species that was genuinely contemptuous would apologize for 6 hours over a misunderstood joke. You apologized that extensively, the analysts concluded, only if the relationship mattered to you. That recalibration had saved the accord. The war that preceded it had taken 63 years and 412 million lives, mostly human, because humans were stubborn in ways that defied modeling. The Vethari Strategic Forecasting Collective had projected human capitulation at year 3. The humans had not been informed of this projection and had therefore not capitulated. At year 11, the collective had quietly revised the projection to year 20. At year 20, they had stopped making projections and begun making a different kind of study. What exactly is this species, and why does it not behave the way matter is supposed to behave when sufficient force is applied? The answer, arrived at over 4 decades of conflict and analysis, was humbling in its simplicity. The humans did not fight because they believed they could win. They fought because they could not conceive of stopping. Not as a failure of imagination, they were imaginative, sometimes brilliantly so, but as a structural feature of what they were. The Vethari had a biological concept called the yield point, the moment at which any system under sufficient stress reorganizes toward a new stable state. Every material had one. Every civilization had one. Every species, in the collective's 10,000-year model of galactic history, had one. The humans appeared not to. Or rather, and this distinction had consumed 3 years of post-ceasefire analysis, their yield point was located somewhere that the collective had never thought to model. Humans did not reorganize toward accommodation when stressed. They reorganized toward identity. The more pressure was applied, the more precisely they knew what they were. The war had not broken them down. It had, in a very real sense, built them up. Each year of fighting had produced a generation more certain of itself, more articulate about what it valued, more willing to endure in the defense of those values. The Vethari had been trying to apply force to a material that hardened under compression. By year 40, the high choir was asking questions that felt, to the older members, like defeat. What are they made of? Can we work with this? Is working with it the only option we have not tried? The ceasefire was proposed, the negotiations began, the accord took shape. And in Appendix 7, buried in the technical language of bonding protocols and diplomatic standing, Sora had inserted the clause that everyone had either overlooked or chosen not to argue about, a marriage alliance. One Vethari of high lineage, one human of demonstrated standing, not symbolic, living, a covenant with teeth. She had proposed it because she believed in it. She had also proposed it because she had, over 2 years of studying the humans, become quietly and thoroughly convinced that if you wanted to understand something, The most direct route was to live beside it. The human's name was Commander Eli Vasquez, and the file that crossed her desk in the third month of negotiations was 43 pages long and deeply strange. He held degrees in xenobotany, systems ecology, and what his own curriculum vitae described without apparent irony as desperate agriculture. He had spent 30 years working behind the front lines of the war, not as a soldier, not as a strategist, but as the person who kept the ground alive. He made food from ash. He designed biological systems that could filter toxins from poisoned water, extract breathable oxygen from atmospheres that had been stripped, build soil from rubble and dead matter in months rather than millennia. He had lost 3 field stations to Vethari bombing runs. He had rebuilt them each time, not in the same location. He had rebuilt them in better locations, having used the interval to improve the design. He had been awarded the Colonial Service Medal twice, and both times the citation included the phrase, "under extreme duress." He had never been formally decorated for combat because he had, as far as the record showed, never used a weapon against another living thing. He had been in firefights. He had been in 2 engagements where his station was the target. He had survived both by methods that were described in the after-action reports as unconventional use of available materials and fortification techniques more commonly associated with agricultural infrastructure than military engineering. He had, the record noted, once held a position against a Vethari ground advance for 6 hours using a combination of irrigation channels, root system barriers, and what the enemy field commander had described in the intercepted communication that ended up in both sides' intelligence archives as some kind of biological wall that we could not identify. It was, Sara determined after analysis, a mycorrhizal network he had accelerated to visible growth using a nutrient solution of his own formulation. The network had spread through the soil at a rate 5 to 8 times its natural speed, and produced a dense mat of root and fungal material that had slowed the advance by the critical hours required for the human evacuation to complete. He had grown a wall out of the ground in 6 hours to save his people. She read the file twice, then she went back to the beginning and read it again. What convinced her, what made her certain he was the right person, was not any of this. It was a 30-second clip attached to the file as supplementary material, captured by a journalist embedded with the Reconstruction Corps in Year 44. It showed Eli crouching in a trench of gray alien soil, bombed flat, stripped of everything, the kind of dirt that had been dead so long that the microbiome was functionally non-existent, with a sample cup in one hand and a grow lamp in the other. The camera caught the moment a seedling pushed its first leaves above the surface of the cup, and Eli laughed. Genuinely, completely laughed, the way children laugh at magic tricks, the way people laugh when something delights them purely, without any agenda in it whatsoever. He laughed because a plant had come up. That was all. That was enough. She watched it 11 times. Then she added his name to Appendix 7. The marriage ceremony was held on neutral ground, a decommissioned military station in the belt between their systems, scrubbed clean of the last 40 years, and decorated with contributions from both cultures. The Vethari had brought their bioluminescent ceremonial fungi, which colonized the walls in soft gold and blue over the 3 days of preparation, producing a shifting light that the humans found beautiful and slightly unnerving. The human delegation had brought food, because humans always brought food when they came to anything, and Eli had personally brought seeds, dozens of them in small cloth packets, different varieties, labeled in his handwriting, and had spent the first evening distributing them to everyone he met, human and Vethari alike, with the air of someone giving away something valuable. A senior Vethari dignitary had turned one of the packets over in her secondary hands, baffled. "You are giving us seeds." "Life takes root," Eli said simply, seemed appropriate. The dignitary had looked at him for a long time. Then she had performed the gesture of second-heart acknowledgement, a motion that had no human analog but roughly translated as, "I understand you now in a way I did not before, and I am grateful for the recalibration." It was not a gesture typically offered to non-Vethari. She had done it without thinking. Sora had watched this from across the reception hall. She had pressed her own secondary hand to her chest without meaning to. It was the gesture her body made when something struck her as true. The ceremony itself combined the essential elements of both traditions, stripped to their cores. The Vethari component was sound and living matter, a chord produced by 3 members of Sora's direct lineage, sustained for 1 breath cycle, the specific harmonic that her family had carried for 300 years as the signature of their bloodline. The exchange of a cutting, a tendril of the silver-leafed climbing plant that had grown in her family's hall for longer than her civilization had had spaceflight, wrapped around a bead of Vethari glass. Eli's component was what he had brought, a single sprig of something in deep purple that had not existed before he grew it. "What is it?" Sora had asked, taking it. "I made it 2 years ago," Eli said. He was straightforward about this the way he was straightforward about everything, not proudly, not performing modesty, just stating facts. Designed for resilience. Low water, low light, salt soil, temperature variance, even some radiation tolerance. The engineering took about 8 months. I've been growing test cultures since then. "You made it 2 years ago," Sora said carefully, "before the accord was finalized." "Before we knew there would be an accord, yes." He met her primary eyes. "I thought if peace came, I wanted something to give, something I'd made, something that would actually survive whatever conditions it ended up in." Sora held the sprig for what felt like a very long time, looking at it, at the small deep purple flowers that had already opened on 2 of its stems. "What did you call it?" she asked. "Perseverance," he said. She looked up at him. "I receive your living thing," she said in Vethari, the formal phrase of the ceremony. "I will tend it." Eli did not speak Vethari. Priya Anand, standing 2 meters to his left in her capacity as head of the human diplomatic mission, translated in a whisper. Eli listened. He was quiet for a moment. He looked at Sora with an expression she did not yet know how to read. She would spend months learning to read it, and said only, "Same." That was the ceremony. The first year of the marriage was, in ways neither of them had articulated and both of them had felt, the most interesting year of their respective lives. They lived aboard the neutral station during the extended post-war reconstruction negotiations, which consumed most of their official hours and a significant portion of their unofficial ones. Sora served on the Vethari Transition Committee. Eli served on the Joint Agricultural Reconstruction Panel, which was technically a minor committee, but which he treated as the most important work he had ever done, because it was. The war had scarred 43 worlds. 43 ecosystems that needed to be rebuilt from the chemistry up. He had been waiting 30 years for the chance to do this properly, with resources, with cooperation, with time. He was incandescent about it, in meetings, at dinner. While washing dishes, which he did by hand when there was the option, a habit that no one could explain and that he had never tried to explain. He would talk about soil chemistry and root network architecture, the way other people talked about their families, with a fundamental, non-negotiable love for the subject that did not require the listener to share it, only to be present. Sora was present. She was studying him. That was the honest description of the first 3 months. She was studying him with the same systematic attention she brought to everything: text analysis, pattern recognition, building a model that would let her predict behavior accurately. The Vethari approach to knowledge was fundamentally textual. Everything was a text to be read. The question was always, what is this thing saying? She read Eli. She read the way he moved through spaces, always taking the perimeter first, not from tactical instinct but from environmental habit. He cataloged what was growing, what light was available, what the airflow was, what could be worked with. She read the way he listened in meetings, which was the way a person listens when they genuinely do not know what the other person is going to say and are interested to find out. She read the way he ate with full attention, as if each meal were data, and the way he cooked, which was a form of experimentation she recognized as scientific even when the subject matter was spices. What she arrived at the end of 3 months of reading was a conclusion she had not expected. His root intention was completely legible. She had read the files, known intellectually that he wanted living things to thrive, but knowing it intellectually had not prepared her for what it felt like to encounter it in practice. It was in every decision. Everything he did was filtered through the same question: does this serve life? Not a grandiose philosophical life, specific, immediate, stubborn life. The plant in the cup, the soil in the trench, the meal on the table, the peace that might let people stop dying. He wanted things to live. The Vethari had a philosophical concept, thousands of years old, foundational to their understanding of identity, called the root intention. The thing beneath all other things. The organizing principle that generated behavior the way a taproot generates a plant. You could know someone's surface well and still misread them because the surface was reactive. The root intention was structural. Eli's was the simplest she had ever read. She told him this one evening, while they were both working late in the small sitting room that had become, by accretion rather than decision, their shared space. He looked up from the soil analysis he had been annotating with the expression she was learning to identify as genuine curiosity. "What does root intention mean?" he asked. She explained it. He thought about this for a while, then he said, "What's yours?" She had not expected the question. No one in her life had asked her this directly. It was not a question the Vethari asked each other, because to ask someone their root intention was to imply you couldn't read it yourself, which was considered either an insult or an admission of unusual opacity. "I think," she said slowly, "that I want things to be understood." He nodded as if this confirmed something. "That's compatible." "With what?" "With wanting things to live." He turned back to his analysis. Understanding is what keeps living things from killing each other by accident. She sat with this for a long time after he had returned to his work. They began eating dinner together in the 4th week. This had not been in the protocol. It had started because they were both, independently, in the galley at the same hour on a Tuesday station evening, and neither had wanted to be the one to leave. By the end of the 1st month, it was simply what they did. By the end of the 2nd month, Eli had begun cooking for the entire station, human and Vethari both, adapting recipes with the same methodical attention he brought to agricultural design. He discovered that certain human spices, specifically a combination of black pepper, coriander, and something that translated from Vethari as sunbark, produced in Vethari tasters the neurochemical response their species associated with satisfaction warmth. Not exactly pleasure, something closer to the feeling of a problem correctly solved. He was delighted by this. He spent 3 evenings refining the ratios. "You're doing it again," Sora told him, watching him adjust the blend for the 4th time. "Which thing?" "The thing where your expression changes when you're about to change something. A specific micro-expression. The left side of your face shifts before you make a decision." He looked up. "You've been cataloging my expressions." "I catalog everything." "I know." He considered this without apparent discomfort. "What does that one mean?" "Hypothesis forming," she said. "You're about to test something." "Fair." He added a fractional increase to the coriander. "What do you do when you're forming a hypothesis?" She thought about it. "I go still, apparently. My secondary staff has mentioned it." "You go still," he repeated. "I go asymmetrical." He offered her a small spoon of the modified blend. "Try this." She tried it. The satisfaction warmth moved through her tasting organs and into her secondary nervous system, clean and immediate. Better, she said. Good. He moved on to the next thing. I overcorrected on the pepper last time. The ratio is about 0.3 coriander to 1 pepper. The sunbark stays fixed. How did you know to look for that combination? I didn't. I was looking for something else and found it. He started on the next element of the meal. That's usually how it works. You're looking for one thing and you find something better. The trick is being willing to change the experiment when the data tells you to. Sora filed this as a key observation, not about cooking, about the man. The attack came in the 14th month, at 3:40 station time. Sora had been awake for an hour before the alarms activated. Something in her secondary hearing, the low-frequency range that her species used for environmental monitoring, largely unconscious, a deep evolutionary inheritance from a time when Vethari lived in dense forests and needed to hear predators approaching through the ground, had been producing an anomalous signal for 90 minutes. She had been lying still in the dark, analyzing it. She had convinced herself twice that it was mechanical resonance from the station's drive assembly. She had not been fully convinced. When the alarm activated, she was already sitting up. Shaketh drive signature, she said to Eli, who was coming awake with the focused speed she had observed in humans who had spent years in dangerous environments. Not slow and confused, immediately present. 3 ships. They translated in system approximately 4 minutes before the alarm. I was hearing the drive resonance before they decloaked. How close? Burning hard for dock range. I need to get to the operations center. They moved through a station that was already transitioning from sleep protocols to emergency function. The human crew ran their procedures with the practiced efficiency of people who had trained for this. The Vethari delegation moved to the positions that their cultural emergency protocols specified. Neither group panicked. This was something Sora had observed about humans and found quietly astonishing. They were not calm in emergencies. They were functional. There was a distinction. Calm was the absence of fear. Functional was the presence of competence operating alongside fear, which was considerably more useful. In the operations center, Commander Tian Ko had the situation mapped in the time it took Sora to cross the room. 3 Shaketh frigates, he said. Fast attack configuration. They're running direct intercept, not trying to hide their approach. He looked at her steadily. We intercepted their comms 40 seconds ago. They're broadcasting on open Vethari military frequencies. Ambassador, they announced their target. Me, Sora said. Your designation and the accord clause you represent. He paused. The bonding clause if you're gone. The High Choir loses its standing. The hardline faction controls the collective within 2 generations. The war restarts from a position where humans have been blamed for breaking the accord. She had modeled this 3 times in the past year. She had known this was the pressure point. She had told the Security Committee it was a theoretical risk. She had been wrong about the theoretical part. What assets do we have? 1 gunship partial operational status drive is at 60%. Point defense is functional. 2 missile tubes online. ECM suite fully operational. He exhaled. Against 3 assault frigates, that's a 30-minute fight at best. Shorter, honestly. There's another option. He looked at her. Their command frequency, she said. She was already moving toward the communications console. I have it. Ko stared at her. How do you have the Shaketh command frequency? My family has been tracking the remnant for 8 months. Unofficially. We suspected they were organizing for an action against the Accord, and we were compiling intelligence. She pulled a data drive from the internal pocket of her diplomatic robe. She had been carrying it since she left Vethari space and interfaced it with the console. I chose not to report it to the Joint Security Committee because I did not want to create the impression that the Vethari delegation was conducting a covert intelligence operation on a peace station. The silence in the operations center was very specific. Sora recognized it. the silence of people deciding whether to be angry later or deal with the immediate problem now. "Can you broadcast on that frequency?" she asked Ko. "If the ECM suite has the range, yes." "Then I need three things: the ECM suite online, the gunship in a blocking position so they cannot dock." And she hesitated for a fraction of a second, which was the amount of time it took her to decide she was going to say what she was about to say, because it was true, and because honesty had served the Accord better than any other strategy. And Eli. In the doorway behind her, Eli said, "I'm here." She turned. He was dressed for work, the field jacket he wore for agricultural operations, soil on his hands that he had not had time to clean since his last bay inspection, which meant he had come directly from wherever he had been working before sleep. He had a look on his face that she knew now as the hypothesis-forming expression, the left side slightly shifted, something assembling behind his eyes. "You heard," she said. "Everything." He came forward. "You need the ECM suite to blind their sensors while you talk to them on the command frequency. That's one component." "I have the other component," he said. "I think." He looked at Ko. "Your hydroponic bay 7, the long one with the microgravity grow stations. I've been running a fungal network test in there for 3 months. Hybrid mycelium, Vethari rootstock crossed with an earth variety I engineered for conductivity. The network covers approximately 400 square meters of the bay floor." Ko said slowly, "Commander Vasquez, this is not the moment for." "When the network is stimulated with electrical current at specific frequencies," Eli continued, as if Ko had not spoken, the way he continued through every meeting when he had something to finish saying, "it produces an electromagnetic interference pattern. I know the frequencies. I've been documenting them as part of the experiment." He looked at Sora. "Shakith military targeting systems, their second-generation targeting systems, the ones fitted on fast attack configurations, operate on a band that overlaps with what the network produces." The operations center went very quiet. "You're telling me," Sora said carefully, "that the fungal network you've been growing in Bay 7 can interfere with their targeting systems?" "I'm telling you it produces an interference pattern in a band that overlaps with their targeting systems. I haven't tested it under combat conditions because I haven't previously been in combat conditions." He held her gaze. "It's worth trying." She looked at him for exactly the length of one breath. She had been in dozens of high-stakes diplomatic situations. She had learned to read the difference between confidence born of knowledge and confidence born of wishful thinking. Eli Vasquez had never, in 14 months, told her something was worth trying when he did not believe it was worth trying. He did not make claims he could not support. His root intention did not leave room for it. "How long do you need?" she said. 6 minutes to run the current through the network. I need someone who knows the station's electrical systems to run the leads without starting a fire." "Chief Engineer Reyes," Ko said, already reaching for his comm. "Bay 7, take Reyes." He looked at Eli. "We have 11 minutes until they reach effective weapons range." "That's comfortable," Eli said, and he was moving before he finished saying it. Sora went to work on the broadcast. What she was doing was not, strictly speaking, a military operation. She was not firing weapons or deploying countermeasures or commanding a defense. She was doing what she had been trained to do for 30 years and what she had done for 14 months on the station. She was speaking. She was constructing an argument. The argument had to accomplish several things simultaneously. It had to occupy their attention, buy Eli the time he needed. It had to reach past the ideological commitment that had brought them here. It had to offer something that a mind already resolved on action could nonetheless hear. And it had to be, in every word, true, because she was a Vethari diplomat of the old school, and her tradition held that deception in formal address was a form of self-destruction. That you could not build anything real on a dishonest argument, regardless of whether the immediate tactic succeeded. She opened the channel. She spoke in the High Choir's formal diplomatic register, the register of maximum binding weight, the linguistic structure that in Vethari culture attached legal and cultural consequence to every word. She knew they would recognize it. She knew it would make some of them angrier. She broadcast anyway. She told them what she had said to the Vethari strategic analysts 4 years ago, before the ceasefire, when the war had been at its most brutal. The humans were not going to stop. Not because they were unable to conceive of stopping. Because they had already conceptualized and rejected stopping, and done this so thoroughly and for so long that the rejection had become identity. Trying to make them stop through force was like trying to make water flow uphill by pushing it. The pressure increased the resistance. The Vethari had a name for this in engineering, Tamvil feedback, systems that strengthen under load. The humans were Tamvil feedback made biological. She told them that she knew this because she had studied these people for 6 years, and she had been married to one for 14 months, and she was standing on a station that was alive and functional because a human man had spent 3 months growing a fungal network in a basement for reasons that had nothing to do with war. And that network was, at this moment, dismantling their ability to target anything on this station. She paused. She let that land. Then she said, "I'm not telling you this to frighten you. I am telling you this because it is what is true, and because what is true is the only thing worth saying to you right now. You came here to break the peace by destroying its symbol. I want you to hear the symbol speak." She could see on the sensor display beside her the Shakath frigate's drive patterns. They were not decelerating, not yet. She kept talking. "The war cost 412 million lives," she said. "That number is not a human number or a Vethari number. It is our number. Both of us made it. It belongs to both of us, the way a scar belongs to the wound and the healing equally. You came here to add to it. I am asking you not to. Not because the accord is fragile, it isn't. Not because I am afraid I am, but that's irrelevant. Because the weight of that number is already more than any cause is worth. You know this. I know you know this because you are Vethari and we carry our dead the same way. We know what they cost." She paused again, longer this time. "If you come in and kill us," she said, "you will not have ended the peace. You will have made it into a story. Stories do not die the way bodies die. They live in the telling. And the story of the human man who grew something that stopped your weapons in order to protect his wife, that story will be told for 1,000 years. You will not have broken a symbol. You will have made one permanent." The Shakath lead frigate's drive signature shifted. Not much, not obviously, a variance within the noise margin of the sensors. But Sora had been reading Vethari body language and Vethari drive patterns and Vethari decision architecture for 3 decades, and she read that variance the way she read a face. Someone on that bridge was wavering. She talked for 4 more minutes. She talked about what the peace had cost the Vethari, not the toll she had quoted to the strategic collective, the economic and demographic figures, but the other cost, the one that did not appear in reports. The cost of being wrong for 63 years. The cost of a civilization that had modeled an opponent incorrectly and paid for that error in generations of blood and grief, and a war that had stripped 43 worlds down to rock. She talked about what it meant to have been wrong and to have chosen to be something other than wrong, and how that choice was the most difficult thing the Vethari had ever done, harder than any battle, because it required dismantling a model that had been the basis of strategy and identity for half a century. "We were wrong," she said. "Not about the humans, about ourselves. We had decided we were the kind of species that could win this way. We were not. Learning that we were not was the most important thing we have learned in a generation. You want to undo that learning. I am asking you to consider what you would replace it with." 93 seconds of silence. The lead frigate began to decelerate. The second and third frigates followed within the minute. The Shaketh formation reversed its approach vector and began moving away from the station at a rate that the sensor analysis would later describe as consistent with tactical withdrawal rather than panicked retreat. They had made a decision. They were executing it. The organized way they left was almost, Sara thought, a form of dignity. She remained at the communications console for 3 minutes after the frigates had moved beyond optimal broadcast range. She did not want to leave while there was still a chance they would return. Then Eli's voice came over the internal comm from Bay 7. Sensors good. Ko checked his board. Frigates are pulling out of the system. You can shut it down. A pause, then, good. The coriander ratio was wrong, by the way. I've been thinking about it. Should be 0.4, not 0.3. Commander Ko stared at the comm panel for a long moment. Then he looked at Sara. 14 months, she said, and he still surprises me. She found Eli in Bay 7 2 hours later. He was sitting on the floor because he sat on floors. This was simply true about him in the middle of the fungal network, which lay in a slightly scorched but primarily intact configuration around him. The emergency power leads were disconnected. The network itself, she noticed, was already recovering. Several tendrils that had been flattened by the current had begun repositioning. Living things adjusted. She had observed this in every aspect of Eli's work. I owe you an apology, she said. He looked up. For which part? The intelligence. The Shaketh files. I should have told you. I figured there was a reason you didn't. The reason was that I was trying to protect the impression of good faith. I was managing perception. She stood above him, looking down at the network. I should have trusted you with the reality instead. He considered this for a moment. Sara, you stopped 3 warships with an argument and some mushrooms. She looked at him. We're okay, he said. Technically a fungal root hybrid. Yes, I know. You always correct me on the mushroom thing. Because it's imprecise. I know. He wasn't smiling exactly, something softer. Are you all right? She sat down, on the floor beside him. She had never sat on a floor with him before. It was lower than she expected, and the perspective it offered the bay from ground level, the network spread out around them like a map of something, was different. I was afraid, she said. I know. I don't mean during the broadcast. I mean before, when I woke up. When I was lying there hearing the drive resonance and trying to convince myself it was the station's engines. She looked at the network. I have never been afraid the way humans describe fear in the literature. The physical component. My species experiences the cognitive response, threat assessment, priority reordering, but not the physical sensation. Or I thought we didn't. She paused. I was afraid, she said again. In my chest, both hearts. Eli was quiet for a moment. Then what were you afraid of? Failing, she considered it. Not dying, failing, not stopping them, losing what this was supposed to be. He nodded slowly. I understand that, he said. He stopped. I think that's what most fear actually is for people who have been doing something long enough, not dying, failing the thing you've committed to. She looked at him. What do you fear failing? He thought about it with the seriousness she had come to rely on. He never gave an answer before he was sure it was the right one. Things dying that I could have kept alive. Yes, she said, exactly. A long silence. The bay hummed with the station's ventilation. The fungal network around them was very still except for the occasional microscopic movement of growth resuming. Then Sara did something she had not done since the ceremony. She laughed. Genuinely, wholly, the full harmonic Vethari laugh that used the upper registers of emotional expression. The sound that meant not just amusement but relief, specifically the relief of a thing having resolved that had been in danger. It surprised her when it came out. She had not planned it. Eli went very still. She stopped. What? Nothing. He was looking at her with the expression she had spent months learning, the quiet, specific, attentive expression that meant he was recording something. "I've been waiting to hear that." "Vethari don't laugh easily," she said, slightly embarrassed. "I know." He looked away at the network. "It was worth waiting for." The official after-action report described what happened that night as a successful combined defensive and diplomatic operation, with commendations recommended for Ambassador Vethanal and Commander Vasquez. It noted the effective use of available electromagnetic countermeasures and characterized the diplomatic broadcast as demonstrating exceptional proficiency under pressure. The informal version, which spread through the joint diplomatic staff within 48 hours and through the broader human Vethari network within a month, was shorter. "She talked them down," people said, "and her husband blinded their targeting systems with the mushrooms he's been growing in the basement." Neither Sora nor Eli attempted to correct the characterization. It was, in its essentials, accurate, and the part that was imprecise, the mushrooms, was imprecise in a way that captured something true about Eli that the technical description missed. He grew things in the basement. He had always grown things in the basement, or wherever there was space and poor conditions and a need that could be met. That was the story, and it was the right one. The Shakith remnant issued no further communications. The hardline Vethari faction they had hoped to catalyze found, instead, that the story was being told on their homeworld, in the corridors of the High Choir, by young analysts who were asking questions that the hardliners had no satisfying answers to. Questions like, if you cannot stop them diplomatically and you cannot stop them militarily, and their diplomat stops military action by speaking and her husband stops weapons systems by growing something, what exactly is your theory of what these people are, and what is your plan? There was no satisfying plan. There was only the war, and the war had already been tried for 63 years, and everyone knew what it had produced. 6 months after the attack, the first joint colonization project broke ground on a planet that had been a battlefield in year 41. Eli led the agricultural reclamation design. He had spent 4 months working with both Vethari and human agricultural specialists, sharing the fungal network technology freely, incorporating Vethari biological knowledge that improved his models in 3 significant ways he had not anticipated, and improving theirs in several ways they had not anticipated either. The result was a reclamation system that no single civilization would have designed alone. On the day the first planting began, Sora stood on the embassy steps and watched Eli argue with a Vethari hydrology engineer about drainage ratios. He had been arguing for 2 hours. He would argue until the ratios were correct. This was simply true about him. He did not accept wrong answers because the argument was tiring. He accepted right answers and then moved to the next problem. Her comm signaled, Priya Anand from the human homeworld, a photograph, the Perseverance cutting rooted in a pot on Priya's desk, 2 purple flowers open. Sora looked at the photograph for a long time. "Priya's cutting is blooming," she told Eli when he came up the steps, the drainage argument apparently resolved. "The first to bloom." "She's been worried about it," he said. "She didn't mention worry." "She wouldn't," he smiled. "She sends photographs when she's worried. When something's fine, she doesn't report on it." Sora filed this as typical Eli. The reading of people through what they chose to share rather than what they said, the same patient attention he gave to soil samples and fungal networks. He treated people like ecosystems. He paid attention to what was growing and what wasn't, and he adjusted accordingly, and he did not stop paying attention. "The 3rd embassy placement review is next week," she said. "The choir has concerns." "Which faction?" A softer voice than the remnant. "The concerns are less absolute." She paused. "I think the story is working." "Which story?" "All of them." She looked across the field at the mixed crews of human and Vethari specialists moving through the newly planted soil, at the planet learning to be alive again, but mostly yours. He made a face. The mushroom story. The fungal root hybrid story. It's embarrassing. I've become the man whose major military contribution was growing things in a basement. Yes, she said. It's a very good story. He looked at her sideways. You're enjoying this. Enormously. He laughed. The open, unguarded laugh that she had watched 11 times on a small screen before she had ever met him. The laugh that contained nothing except genuine feeling. She thought about what she had said to the Shaketh, that stories do not die the way bodies die, that they live in the telling. Eli had told her she was wrong. Stories die all the time, and the ones that survive are the ones someone keeps tending. He was right. He was right about most things that mattered in her experience, and he was honest about it in both directions. Honest when he was right and honest when he was wrong, with the same lack of investment in being either. He just wanted to know which was true, so he could calibrate accordingly. I want to tell you something, she said. He looked at her. Before the negotiations, before I knew who you were or what you did, the specific you, Eli Vasquez, name and file and record. She chose her words with care. There was a recording, a journalist's clip. You were in a trench on a bombed world, growing something in a sample cup under a grow lamp. He was quiet, waiting. When the seedling came up, she said, you laughed. He remembered it, she could see. Something shifted in his expression. I watched it 11 times, she said, and when I came to the end of the 11th viewing, I knew you were the right person. Not because of what you had grown or what you had survived or what the file said about you, because of the laughing. She held his gaze. The Vethari could not model it. The Strategic Collective for 63 years could not model that response. You were not happy because you had succeeded. You were happy because something existed that had not existed before. You laughed because a plant came up. That was sufficient. She paused. We could not model sufficiency. The drainage engineer was shouting something from across the field. Eli turned briefly, assessed, shouted a response and turned back. I remember that day, he said. That world had been dead for 12 years. Nothing had grown there in 12 years because the bombing had destroyed the topsoil microbiome down to 5 meters. We'd been working on it for 3 weeks. He looked at the field in front of them. It was the first shoot. Yes. He was quiet for a moment. I didn't know anyone was filming, he said. I know. Another pause. It was just, he stopped, found the words. When something comes up after that long, after that much, it's just right. It's just how things should be. It should live, and it does. He shook his head slightly. I don't know how to explain why that's funny. I don't think it's funny, Sora said. I think it's joyful, and I think you express joy through laughter, she considered. The Vethari have no equivalent response. Joy for us is very still. Very internal, a held thing. She paused. I have wondered sometimes which is better. Both, he said immediately. She smiled, the Vethari smile which lived in the secondary eyes, a brightness. Yes, I think both. 3 years after the attack, the Perseverance strain had been planted on 47 worlds. Most of them were reclamation sites, bombed, stripped again, the kind of soil that geologists described with the word inert, and that Eli described with the word waiting. It grew on all of them. The Vethari developed a name for it that did not translate with precision, but rendered, roughly, as the gift given at the beginning of what comes after. The humans developed a simpler name that emerged in the field crews and spread without coordination. Peace plant. No one authorized it. It was simply true, and true things do not require authorization. They require only that someone keep paying attention to them and not stop. In the embassy on the first reclaimed world beside the entrance, Sora had placed the original cutting the week they moved in. She had not marked it. She had put it where people would pass it, where it would be seen without being explained. Eli had noticed it on the second day. He had stood in front of it for a moment, looking at it. He had not said anything. He had gone inside. At dinner that evening, he had reached across the table and covered her secondary hand with his. He had not mentioned the plant. He did not need to. She understood. They ate, and outside the windows, in the long amber light of a reclaimed sun, the Perseverance bloomed. And at the edge of a neighboring system, on 3 frigates whose crews had made a decision and lived with it for 3 years, 3 cuttings were putting out their first leaves in small pots that no one had formally requested or officially documented. They sat in corners of crew quarters where the viewport light came through at the right angle. No one had brought them as gifts. No one had asked. They had simply appeared in the weeks after a decision made in the dark, made by people who had chosen not to add their own names to a number that was already too large. What they were saying, in the language of living things, which required no translation and no authorization and no formal register, was the same thing they had always been saying. We want things to live. That was all. That was everything. That was, in the end, the only argument that had ever worked. There was a Vethari word, one of the genuinely untranslatable ones, the kind that language historians noted as markers of something a culture had understood that others hadn't gotten around to naming, called Velshari. It meant, roughly, the moment you realize that the thing you were afraid of has become the thing you are grateful for. Not relief exactly. Not just gratitude. The specific recognition of a close thing. If this had not happened, I would not have this. Sora thought about Velshari often, in the years that followed. She thought about it when she watched the reclamation team's work. The Vethari biologists learning the human mycorrhizal techniques, the human soil chemists learning the Vethari atmospheric seeding methods, the hours of argument and recalibration and error and correction that were, underneath all the technical language, one long conversation between 2 civilizations about what life needed to survive. She thought about it when she received reports from the High Choir's younger generation, analysts she had never met who were citing her diplomatic broadcasts in their own work, not as historical documents but as models, templates for how to speak when the situation was impossibly weighted. She thought about it at the annual Accord review meetings, which had started as guarded, formal affairs and had slowly, year by year, become something more like what human diplomats called a working relationship and Vethari diplomats called a text one is genuinely interested in continuing to read. She thought about it most, though, in the small, unremarkable moments of the life she had not anticipated. Eli at 600, already in the bay or in the field, or on a comm with an agricultural team on the other side of the planet, speaking in the focused, energized voice he used when something was working. The dinner conversations that always started as debriefs and became something else. Not just an exchange of information, but the particular pleasure of thinking alongside someone whose mind worked differently from yours and produced, for that reason, different and useful things. The way he had started learning Vethari, slowly but with the same systematic attention he gave everything, and the way he asked about words that didn't have human equivalents, not to catalog them as curiosities, but to understand what they pointed at, what the Vethari had understood that humans hadn't named yet. He asked about Velshari on a Tuesday evening in the 2nd year, sitting at the table with a cup of something that smelled like black pepper and sunbark and was, she had come to understand, a human invention he called adapted chai that contained elements of both their food traditions and tasted, according to Priya Anand, who had tried it on a visit, like what peace would taste like if you could brew it. Is there a word, he asked, for when you're grateful for something that almost went wrong? Velshari, she said. How do you say it? She said it. He tried it. He was still working on his vowel harmonics, and the word required 2 simultaneous sounds that human mouths were not quite built for. He got 70% of it. She told him this honestly, because she was always honest with him about his Vethari. What does it mean exactly? He said, Not the translation, the full meaning. She thought about how to explain it. When something frightened you, or hurt you, or nearly broke something that mattered and then it didn't, and you look back and you realize that the thing you were afraid of is part of what made the thing you love, that without the threat, the response wouldn't have happened. Without the pressure, the shape wouldn't be what it is. She paused. It's not exactly gratitude for the fear. It's the recognition that you can't separate what you were afraid of from what you became. Eli turned the word over in his mind the way she had learned he turned things over, quietly, attentively, not rushing to use it before he understood it. We don't have a word for that, he said. I know. We have silver lining, he made a face. It's not the same thing. No, a silver lining is finding the good within the bad. Velshari is recognizing that the bad and the good are not separable, that the shape of the good thing is made by the pressure that threatened it. He looked at her, like the mycelium, he said. She raised her secondary eyes. When you stress a mycelial network, temperature variation, nutrient scarcity, mechanical disruption, it doesn't just survive. It grows differently. The stress changes the network's architecture, makes it denser, more connected, more resilient. He turned his cup around in his hands. Some of the most robust networks I've grown came from the most disrupted conditions. You can't get that network from easy growth. The difficulty is part of the structure. She looked at him for a long moment. Velshari, she said. Velshari, he agreed. He tried the pronunciation again, better this time. The harmonics were closer. She filed the conversation the way she filed everything, not just as data but as texture. This was what the file and the recording and the 43 pages had not captured and could not have captured, what it was like to think alongside him, the quality of attention he brought, the way he moved from one domain to another, mycelium to philosophy, soil chemistry to diplomatic theory, cooking to ecology, not because he was scattered but because he saw the connections, and the connections were real, and he trusted them. In the 4th year of the peace, Sara was asked by the High Choir to deliver the annual address at the Vethari Convocation, the formal assembly that all senior members of the diplomatic corps attended, that had been, for 1100 years, the occasion for the most significant statements of Vethari policy and philosophy. She spent 3 weeks writing it. She had written formal addresses before. This one was different because she had been asked not to address the war or the accord or the reconstruction. Those were established, documented, part of the official record. She had been asked to address the future. What came next? What the Vethari understanding of the galactic context should be, now that the model that had governed it for 63 years had been proven wrong. She wrote it, she revised it. She read it to Eli, which she had started doing with important documents not for feedback on the content, but because reading aloud changed her relationship to her own words, and she had discovered that Eli was an extraordinarily good listener, the kind that asked questions only when the questions were necessary, and otherwise simply received what you were saying without filling the space. She read the address to him on a Friday evening, sitting in the room that had become their shared space in the same way the galley dinners had become a shared habit, by accretion, by the accumulation of evenings spent in the same place doing compatible things. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. The part about Tamvil feedback, he said. The part about systems that strengthen under load. Yes. You say humans are an example of this, but you don't say, he paused, you don't say that the Vethari response to humans was also Tamvil feedback. She stared at him. The war stressed the Vethari in ways that changed the Vethari, he said. Not just the strategic doctrine, the whole civilization. 63 years of being wrong and not being able to stop it that changes a civilization's architecture, makes it denser in some ways, differently connected. He looked at her. The Vethari that came to the peace table weren't the Vethari who started the war. They couldn't have been. The pressure changed the shape. Velshari, she thought. She looked at the address. She looked at what she had written, accurate, thorough, carefully constructed, and at what it didn't say. "May I?" she asked. He handed her the writing tool he had been using for his own notes. She wrote for 20 minutes, standing at the table, adding 3 paragraphs to the address. When she was done, she read them aloud. He listened. "Better," he said. "Yes," she said, "better." The convocation address was later described by 3 generations of Vethari diplomatic scholars as the foundational document of what they called the New Comprehension. Not a policy document, but a philosophical one. The moment the Vethari formally articulated the thing they had learned about themselves, as a result of 63 years of being wrong about someone else. The line that was quoted most often in the years that followed was one of the 3 paragraphs she had added on a Friday evening with a borrowed writing tool. It read, "We went to the peace table believing we were meeting a species that had survived us. We were wrong. We met a species that had become something because of us and discovered in that meeting that we had also become something because of them. The war did not only take from both of us, it also made something. That making was terrible in its cost. It was also real. We do not honor the cost by pretending the making did not happen. We honor it by tending what was made." She had borrowed the word from a human man who grew things in dead soil and laughed when they came up. Outside the convocation hall, on a terrace that looked out over the Capitol, the rebuilt Capitol, the one that looked different now than it had before the war, and that was, for that reason and in the specific Vethari sense, more itself, 3 pots of perseverance were blooming in the afternoon light. Someone had placed them there. No one knew who. No one had asked. They were simply there, as things that belong somewhere come to be there, through the accumulated small decisions of people who understood what they were looking at and wanted it to remain. The perseverance bloomed. And somewhere in the garden district of the Capitol, in a consultation room that had been a bomb shelter in year 40 and was now a teaching space for young Vethari agricultural scientists who were learning the combined techniques developed by teams that had once been enemies, a recording played on the wall screen during the opening session of a new class. 30 seconds, a trench, a grow lamp, a sample cup, a seedling, and a man laughing. The instructor paused the recording there, on the laugh. "This," she said to the students, "is what we could not model. This is what changed everything. Not the weapon, not the strategy, this." She touched the frozen image on the screen. "This response, this capacity." This, she used a word the students had not heard in a classroom before, a word usually reserved for philosophy seminars and formal addresses and the rare private conversation. Velshari, joy at surviving, joy at the simple fact of continuation. One of the students raised a secondary hand. "He is joyful because the plant survived." "He is joyful," the instructor said, "because it is alive, because it exists and it does not have to, and it does. For him, that is enough." She looked at the class. The Vethari Strategic Collective modeled every variable of the human response to war and could not predict their endurance. They modeled resources, they modeled population, they modeled technology. They did not model this. She tapped the frozen image one more time. They did not model what happens when a species finds sufficiency in the fact of living, when surviving is, in itself, the reason to continue. The class was quiet. "That is what we are here to understand," the instructor said. "Not to replicate. We are not them and they are not us, but to understand." She started the recording again. The man in the trench laughed. "Because understanding is what keeps living things from killing each other by accident." She had borrowed that sentence too. She had borrowed it from an ambassador's address. The ambassador had borrowed it from her husband. He had said it while adjusting the coriander ratio, 8 years ago, in a galley kitchen on a station between their worlds, on an evening that had seemed at the time like merely an ordinary evening, and had turned out to be the kind that, in retrospect, you understood as the ones that mattered. The ones where something true was said in passing, without fanfare, in the way that the most true things are usually said. Outside the teaching room, a perseverance cutting bloomed on a windowsill. Sufficiency, it said, in the only language it had. We are alive. We are alive, and that is enough.